The clinking of silverware stopped. Wayne Jensen, 3 drinks deep and radiating self-importance, leaned across the executive table, a sneer twisting his mouth. "A woman of your caliber," he drawled, his gaze locking onto mine. "Married below your league?" The insult hung heavy, exposing me, leaving me utterly alone as his cruel laughter echoed through the silent ballroom. The Prairie Point Solutions annual gala hummed with a predictable drone of corporate ambition and polite conversation. I wore the midnight blue dress I'd picked out for its clean lines, its quiet confidence, much like the company image I helped craft. From my seat at the head executive table, I watched Wayne Jensen, my boss, across the room. He was laughing a little too loud, his hand already on his third whiskey glass, his eyes scanning the crowd. He paused, his gaze settling on Jed, my husband, who was talking amiably to one of the younger associates by the dessert bar. A flicker of something unpleasant crossed Wayne's face. Later, Wayne joined our table, sliding into the empty seat beside me. His breath carried the sharp scent of alcohol. The conversation drifted, as it always did, to achievements, to golf handicaps, to the latest mergers. Jed, quiet but attentive, was a carpenter by trade, a master craftsman, his hands rough and scarred from years of working wood. Wayne, catching his eye, offered a thin, forced smile. "Jed, isn't it? Sarah's? What is it you do again? A hobbyist handyman, if I recall?" The words were low, but the microphone on the podium, left open from a prior speech, carried a faint echo, just enough for others at the table to turn their heads. My jaw tightened. Wayne knew perfectly well what Jed did. He'd seen the photos, the house plans. "Jed's a master carpenter, Wayne, I said, my voice carefully neutral. "He just finished the restoration on the McCready place. It's been in all the local papers." Wayne let out a dismissive chuckle, a harsh, brittle sound. "Oh, a master carpenter. How quaint. Isn't that just a fancy way of saying a common handyman these days?" He looked around the table, inviting agreement, a challenge in his eyes. The table fell silent, the air suddenly thick. Jed's knuckles, I noticed, were white where he gripped his water glass, but his face remained impassive, betraying nothing. He cleared his throat. "I'd be happy to show you my portfolio, Wayne, some of my custom work, if you're interested." His voice was low, steady, a quiet offer that contained a hint of something deeper, a controlled edge. Wayne waved a hand, dismissing the offer without a second thought. He didn't even look at Jed. Instead, he turned his full attention on me, his eyes gleaming with a predatory satisfaction. "A woman of your caliber, Sarah," he repeated, louder this time, making sure it carried beyond our immediate circle. "Prairie Point's most promising manager. To marry? Well, below your league?" A searing silence followed. The clinking of distant champagne flutes seemed impossibly loud. Then a few nervous chuckles rippled around the table, a pathetic attempt to diffuse the tension Wayne had so deliberately created. My face burned. Humiliation, hot and raw, washed over me, quickly followed by a cold, quiet fury. Wayne leaned back, a smug smile playing on his lips, as if he'd just landed a decisive blow. Jed's hand found mine under the table, his finger squeezing gently. I felt the calluses, the strength. For a fleeting second, I saw a flash of hurt in his eyes, quickly masked by that same resolute calm. He stood up, slowly, deliberately. "I think I'll get some air," he said, his voice even, not quite meeting Wayne's gaze. He nodded faintly to the others at the table, then turned and walked away, his shoulders back, his stride even. He left with a quiet dignity that, in that moment, made Wayne and his sneering arrogance look small and petty. The drive home was quiet, save for the hum of the tires on the asphalt. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles aching. The memory of Wayne's words, the nervous chuckles, Jed's masked pain, it all replayed in an endless loop. Guilt gnawed at me. I should have said more, done more. We arrived at our house, the craftsman bungalow Jed had spent 2 years meticulously restoring, a testament to his skill and vision. It was beautiful, warm, filled with the scent of cedar and lemon polish. I followed him into the living room, the soft lamplight casting long shadows. "Jed," I began, my voice tight, "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have let him talk to you like that. I should have shut him down." He turned to face me, his gaze steady, devoid of defeat, but holding a dangerous intensity I hadn't seen in a long time. "Don't worry, love," he said, his voice softer now, yet firm. "He just doesn't know who he's dealing with." That night, lying beside him in our quiet bedroom, we named him our room, Wayne's smug, triumphant face kept replaying behind my eyelids. It wasn't just corporate politics, it felt deeper, more insidious. This wasn't just about a boss putting an employee in her place. This was personal. The scent of brewing coffee usually brought a quiet solace to our kitchen, but this morning it mingled with a lingering bitterness from the night before. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing above our reclaimed oak kitchen island. Jed sat opposite me, nursing his mug, his expression unreadable. I watched the steam curl from my own cup. The words came out, flat and resolute, without emotion, like a statement of fact. "I want to destroy Wayne Jensen." Jed simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. He took a sip of his coffee. "I was thinking the same thing," he said, his voice calm, steady. "But we need to be smart about it." I looked at him, surprised. The quiet composure, the lack of any visible anger, was unsettling. "You're not upset that I want revenge?" He met my gaze, a flicker of something in his eyes, part amusement, part a steely resolve I hadn't fully appreciated before. "Sarah," he said, setting his mug down with a soft click, "you forget. Before I was a carpenter, I spent 5 years in corporate finance, straight out of college. Worked in Chicago, actually." The admission hung in the air, unexpected. I had always known Jed as the man who loved the smell of sawdust, the feel of wood grain, the satisfaction of building something lasting with his own hands. His past in finance had been a footnote, a brief phase he rarely spoke of, something he'd dismissed as a suit and tie prison. I hadn't realized the depth of that experience. "I know exactly how men like Jensen operate," he continued, his voice taking on a quiet authority I seldom heard. "The networking, the backroom deals, the little nudges that push things in their favor. The way they talk without saying anything concrete. And," he added, a hard glint in his eyes, "I know exactly how to take them down. I just prefer working with my hands, building something real." So, over the lingering warmth of our morning coffee, Operation Jensen Takedown was born. The words were spoken in hushed tones across the smooth surface of our kitchen island, a silent pact sealed not with a handshake, but with a shared understanding and a simmering resolve. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic plan laid out, just a mutual recognition of a wrong that needed to be righted, quietly, effectively. My part began at my desk at Prairie Point Solutions. I started digging. Not openly, not directly, but through the peripheral vision of my routine tasks. I pulled up old financial reports, archiving older files, ostensibly cleaning up our digital storage. My focus was Wayne. I went back 3 years, to the time of his unprecedented rise to chief financial officer. It was a rapid ascent, almost too quick, bypassing several seasoned veterans. I looked for anomalies, for anything that felt out of place. His executive reports were always polished, impressive, but beneath the surface I started to notice a peculiar vagueness around certain major accounts. Large sums, significant deals, often lacked the granular detail I'd grown accustomed to seeing in other managers' reports. There were always clever workarounds, broad strokes, and explanations that sounded plausible, but offered little in the way of hard, verifiable specifics. I started making mental notes, cataloging the dates, the numbers, the missing links. It felt like assembling a jigsaw puzzle in the dark, each piece a whisper of suspicion. Meanwhile, Jed set about his own kind of research. He didn't sit in front of a computer. He picked up his phone, made calls, drove his truck to lumber yards and hardware stores. He tapped into his sprawling network of contractors and suppliers, the men and women who bought and sold materials, who worked on every major renovation and new build in the county. "You hear anything about that Jensen fella?" he'd ask, casual, leaning against a stack of 2x4s, or over a cup of coffee at the local diner. The construction community was a unique ecosystem, an informal clearinghouse of information. They knew everything, heard everything, especially about the wealthy clients, the big spenders, the men who built new wings on their lakeside mansions or tore down old historic homes. Whispers traveled faster than email in their world. Stories traded alongside prices for drywall and copper piping. Jed listened patiently, letting the threads of gossip and casual observation weave into a pattern. 3 weeks crawled by. My evenings were spent staring at spreadsheets, cross-referencing figures that seemed to float just beyond the realm of sense. Jed's evenings were spent at the shop or at the local watering hole, nursing a beer and listening. One Tuesday he came through the back door, the scent of fresh-cut lumber still clinging to his work shirt, but with a different kind of energy in his step. There was a faint gleam in his eye, the kind that promised an unraveling. He grabbed a beer from the fridge, twisted the cap off with a practiced flick, and leaned against the counter. "Remember Rusty Peterson?" he asked, taking a long swallow. "My old cabinetry supplier, the one with the parrot and the questionable tattoos." I looked up from the quarterly report I was dissecting. "That's him," I confirmed. Rusty's parrot, a foul-mouthed macaw named Captain, was legendary. "What about him?" Jed wiped a bead of condensation from the bottle. "Turns out Rusty did some custom work at Jensen's estate a couple years back. A big job, paid in cash, entirely off the books." My pen paused over a column of numbers. "Off the books? Tax evasion?" The question hung in the air, a small tendril of suspicion. "That's just the beginning." Jed lowered his voice, leaning in slightly. "Rusty said Jensen has a hidden room, down in the basement, soundproofed. Even has its own separate entrance from the garden, disguised as a shed door." I stared at him, a nervous laugh escaping me. "A secret room? That's kind of cliché for a villain, don't you think?" The image of a cartoon mastermind twirling his mustache flickered in my mind, incongruous with the serious look on Jed's face. Jed just shrugged, unimpressed by my flippancy. "Maybe, but Rusty also said the contractor who built it was sworn to secrecy, paid triple his usual rate. And while Rusty was measuring for custom shelving inside," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "he overheard Jensen on the phone. Something about moving offshore accounts, keeping the board in the dark about certain transfers." My heart, which had been beating a steady rhythm of numbers and financial jargon for weeks, suddenly quickened. The pieces, disparate and unrelated just moments ago, began to shift, to align. "Offshore accounts," I murmured, the words feeling weighty, tangible. "Keeping the board in the dark. This could be something, Jed. This could be big." I thought of my own work, the endless hours spent poring over Prairie Point's records. "It brings me back to the Riverbend Tech acquisition," I said slowly, tracing an invisible pattern on the Oak Island with my finger. 2 years ago, that was Wayne's big win, the deal that supposedly cemented his position as CFO. Everyone called him a genius after that one. "The tech company acquisition?" Jed asked, a frown creasing his brow. "I remember you talking about that. Seemed like a good move for the company." "On the surface, yes," I agreed. "The stock soared, profits jumped. But the numbers, the internal projections, they never quite made sense. There were inconsistencies, discrepancies in the due diligence reports that I flagged, but they were dismissed as minor. No one questioned it because the deal was so profitable. Everyone just wanted to celebrate the win." My mind raced, connecting the vagueness in Wayne's past reports to Rusty's eavesdropping. "You think he's been cooking the books?" Jed asked, his voice low and serious now. "I think," I replied, the conviction settling deep in my gut. "Wayne Jensen has been very carefully constructing his success on a house of cards. We just need to find the right card to pull." The quiet fury from the gala night, suppressed for weeks, began to stir again, but this time it was colder, sharper, honed into purpose. The following morning, I arrived at the coffee shop near Prairie Point Solutions a little earlier than usual. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and freshly roasted beans. I knew Doris Hayes, Prairie Point's longtime administrative assistant, usually stopped here for her morning caramel macchiato. Doris had been with the company for over 20 years, a quiet fixture, her knowledge of company comings and goings unparalleled. Wayne, like many of the executives, often treated her as if she were part of the furniture, present but invisible. This I knew was a mistake. I spotted her in line, already holding her usual overly sweet concoction. "Oh, Doris," I exclaimed, feigning surprise, my voice bright and friendly. "Just the person I wanted to see. Let me get that for you. Consider it a thank you for saving my hide with those quarterly reports last week." I reached for her wallet before she could protest, flashing a sincere smile. Doris, a woman with tight curls and even tighter floral blouses, blinked, momentarily flustered. She wasn't used to such overt gestures from the younger executives. But a free coffee, especially her favorite, was hard to refuse. "Oh, Sarah, you really don't have to." "Nonsense," I insisted, already at the register. "Consider it done." 20 minutes later, nestled in a quiet corner booth, Doris was happily gossiping, warmed by the sugar and caffeine. We talked about office politics, the absurdities of the new coffee machine, and then, slowly, carefully, I steered the conversation. "You know," I mused, stirring my black coffee, "I remember a couple of years back, around the Riverbend acquisition, Mr. Jensen was just impossible to pin down, always in meetings, flying out to New York. He really put in the hours for that deal, didn't he?" Doris nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. "Oh, he certainly did, or so he said." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Actually, right before that deal closed, he had me cancel all his appointments. Very last minute, said it was a family emergency." My internal alarm bells began to clang, but I kept my face carefully neutral. "Oh, really? I hope everything was all right." "Well," Doris continued, lowering her voice even further, "that very evening I saw him at Lasserk. You know, the steakhouse downtown? He was with some men I didn't recognize. Not looking very emergency-stricken, if you catch my drift. Laughing it up, actually." My heart gave a sharp thud against my ribs. "Lasserk's, huh? When was this exactly?" I asked, as casually as I could manage, taking a slow sip of coffee. Doris frowned in thought, then her eyes brightened with recall. "Oh, I remember exactly. April 15th, 2 years ago. Tax day. I was rushing my own returns that year, so the date stuck in my head. April 15th. The date hit me like a physical blow. That was the exact day Wayne Jensen had claimed he was leading the final crucial negotiations for the Riverbend Tech acquisition. The day he'd supposedly secured the unprecedented terms that led to Prairie Point's biggest win in years. He'd sent out a company-wide email gloating about closing the deal personally in a tense, all-night session in New York. Instead, he was apparently clinking glasses at Lasserk's with unnamed men. "Did you ever mention seeing him there to anyone?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Doris shook her head immediately. "Lord, no, not my business. Besides, Mr. Jensen signs my performance reviews, you know." Her gaze held mine, a shared understanding passing between us. Two women in a corporate world still largely run by men like Wayne. "But between us, Sarah," she leaned closer, "there's been a lot of similar emergencies over the years. Always around big deals or important board meetings. Always when he was supposedly out of town, doing something crucial." I thanked Doris again, feigning a sudden rush to get back to the office. As I walked out into the morning chill, my mind raced. The pieces Jed and I had been gathering were suddenly clicking into place with frightening speed. The offshore accounts, the secret room, the vague financial reports, and now this deliberate deception of his whereabouts during a pivotal acquisition. Wayne wasn't just cooking the books. He was crafting an entire false narrative built on lies and hidden dealings. And Doris inadvertently had just handed me a key part of the recipe. That night, our dining table, usually reserved for quiet dinners and the occasional pile of mail, became our war room. Sarah's financial notes, meticulously cross-referenced and annotated, lay spread beside Jed's collection of contractor rumors, whispers of off-the-books jobs, hushed renovations, and peculiar demands. A large, glossy photo of Wayne Jensen's sprawling lakeside estate, pulled from a luxury real estate magazine, formed the centerpiece. "We need hard evidence," I stated, tapping my pen against a printout of the Riverbend Tech acquisition summary. "Suspicions won't be enough for someone as connected as Wayne. He'll just spin it, blame someone else, bury us in legalities." My finger pointed to the blank spaces where crucial details should have been. "These are gaps, not smoking guns." Jed leaned over the photo of Wayne's house, tracing the lines of the sprawling modern structure with a calloused finger. He studied the detached garage, the manicured gardens, the clean, almost sterile architecture. What if, he began slowly, straightening up, a sly smile spreading across his face. What if Wayne hired me for a job? I frowned, pushing a stray strand of hair behind my ear. Why would he? He clearly disrespects your work. You heard him at the gala. The memory still stung, a sharp, unwelcome echo. Not as Jed Miller, your husband, Jed clarified, his eyes glinting with an idea, but as E. Montgomery, exclusive furniture designer to the stars. My confusion must have been evident, so he elaborated. The guy who just did that hush-hush renovation for the McCready place, the one everyone's talking about. You know, the historic landmark that now looks completely stunning, but nobody knows who did it? He paused for effect, but who's very selective about his clients, takes on only the most prestigious, the most challenging projects. My eyes widened. The McCready place was indeed the talk of the town, a beautiful, sprawling estate that Jed had transformed with exquisite craftsmanship and quiet artistry. But the owner, a reclusive heiress, had insisted on absolute discretion, refusing all interviews or public recognition. It was a masterpiece known only by word of mouth among the wealthy elite. You think his ego would make him bite? Jed's smile broadened, turning almost predatory. I know it would. Men like Wayne, they can't resist a chance to prove they're on the same level as the elites, the ones who get access to the exclusive, the hush-hush talents. He wouldn't be hiring me because he respects my work. He'd be hiring E. Montgomery because he thinks it elevates him. He then stood taller, adjusting an imaginary tie, his voice shifting, taking on a refined, slightly aloof cadence. Mr. Jensen, it's a pleasure. Your estate offers intriguing possibilities. I rarely take on new commissions, but I confess the challenge of working with such contemporary lines appeals to my particular aesthetic. He even managed a faint, disdainful sniff. It was a masterful transformation, almost unnerving to watch. We spent the next hour strategizing the details. How to get the E. Montgomery name subtly into Wayne's orbit. A strategically placed mention at the country club by a mutual, unwitting acquaintance. A whispered compliment from a local art dealer who occasionally commissioned Jed for custom display pieces. It had to be organic, something Wayne would stumble upon and then chase, convinced it was his own brilliant discovery. We needed to ensure Wayne, in his arrogance, would seek out E. Montgomery, desperate for a piece of that exclusive, elusive talent. It wasn't just about getting inside his house, it was about getting inside his head. Life's costly choices unfold in unexpected ways, don't they? Stick around to the end to see how these intricate plans unravel. The plan, against all reasonable expectations, worked. Within a month, the name E. Montgomery, whispered from the lips of influential art collectors and interior designers, reached Wayne Jensen. His ego, predictable in its hunger for status, latched onto it. A polite but insistent email arrived in Jed's Montgomery inbox, requesting a consultation for a bespoke library remodel. Jed, now fully embodying E. Montgomery, arrived at Wayne's sprawling estate 2 weeks later. He wore an expensive tailored jacket I'd found on consignment and carried a leather-bound sketchbook, not his usual worn carpenter's pencil. His demeanor was one of polite, detached professionalism, an artist considering a challenge, not a tradesman seeking work. Wayne, playing the magnanimous patron, ushered him in, clearly relishing the chance to host such a renowned talent. The proposed library remodel was conveniently located adjacent to Wayne's home office. While Wayne pontificated about rare books and antique maps, Jed moved with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to precise measurements. His hands, usually busy with wood, now held a tape measure and a small, almost invisible tool. Beneath the guise of mapping out custom shelving and built-in reading nooks, he discreetly placed tiny, high-fidelity listening devices. One went behind a heavy velvet curtain, another subtly tucked into the underside of a grand oak desk. He spoke in low, cultured tones, nodding thoughtfully at Wayne's suggestions. All the while his mind was a whirlwind of observation. He mapped the house as he moved through it, confirming Rusty's intel. The faint seam in the study's intricate wood paneling, almost imperceptible, concealed the entrance to the soundproofed room. He noted the precise angle of the security cameras, the foot traffic from the staff, Wayne's own habits, the times he retreated to his study, the duration of his calls, the unusual frequency with which certain unknown men, often in expensive suits, would arrive after dark and disappear behind that hidden panel. He committed every detail to memory. Back home, under the soft glow of our living room lamp, Jed and I meticulously listened to the recordings. The quality was surprisingly clear. At first, it was just the mundane sounds of an executive's life. Phone calls about golf, complaints about stock performance, the clink of ice in a glass. Then, slowly, the more disturbing snippets began to emerge. Faint voices, muffled by the soundproofing, yet audible. Words like offshore transfers, shell companies, and masking the numbers drifted through the static, cold and calculated. Armed with this new audio evidence, a chilling confirmation of our suspicions, I dove deeper into the Riverbend Tech acquisition documents. The pieces were no longer just clicking, they were slamming into place. My previous vague unease about the numbers solidified into a concrete, damning picture. I traced the money, following the convoluted paper trail. Riverbend Tech, a mid-sized software company, hadn't been acquired directly by Prairie Point Solutions. Instead, it had first been bought by a virtually unknown offshore shell company. This shell company, with an untraceable address and obscure directors, then immediately turned around and sold Riverbend Tech to Prairie Point Solutions at a significantly inflated price. A price that perfectly accounted for the inexplicable jump in Prairie Point's stock and Wayne's celebrated financial coup. The profits for Prairie Point were real, but they were artificially boosted, a deliberate act of financial manipulation. The final damning piece of the puzzle emerged when I cross-referenced the shell company's obscure registration details with the whispers Jed had recorded. The beneficial owner, hidden behind layers of legal obfuscation, was none other than Wayne Jensen himself. We had found it. The intricate money laundering scheme, the corporate fraud, all tied to Wayne's big win, the very deal that had propelled him to the pinnacle of Prairie Point Solutions. It was all there, laid bare. The morning after our discovery, the air in our kitchen was charged with a different kind of intensity. I sat at the oak island, not with coffee, but surrounded by a growing stack of papers. On one side were my printouts of Riverbend Tech's acquisition, highlighting the suspiciously high resale price and the shell company's obscure origins. On the other, Jed's neat transcriptions of the audio snippets, the chilling phrases offshore transfers, masking the numbers, and the explicit mention of Wayne Jensen's name. There were also the subtle photographs Jed had taken during his consultation, showing the precise location of the hidden panel in Wayne's study, the one concealing the soundproofed room. Doris Hayes' casual confession, though not physically present, wove through the narrative, connecting the dots of Wayne's deceptive absences. "This is it," I said, sliding the dossier, now neatly bound in a simple folder, across the table to Jed. "Everything. The financial records, the recordings, the testimony. It all points to him." Jed flipped it through the pages, his expression grave. "It's damning. No way he walks away from this." We had discussed our next move for hours. Going through human resources was out of the question. It would give Wayne time to prepare, to spin his narrative, to leverage his influence. We needed to go straight to the top. "Eleanor Vance," I affirmed. Eleanor was the CEO, a formidable woman who valued results, but also integrity. She built Prairie Point Solutions from the ground up, and she wouldn't tolerate this kind of rot within her company. I walked into Eleanor Vance's office a few days later, the folder heavy in my hand, but my step light with resolve. The view from her corner office stretched for miles, a testament to her vision. Eleanor looked up from her enormous desk, her steel gray hair pulled back tightly, her gaze sharp. "Sarah, what can I do for you?" "Eleanor," I began, my voice calm, steady. "I've uncovered some irregularities regarding the Riverbend Tech acquisition. I believe it's something I need to see immediately." She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Sit." I laid the folder on her polished mahogany desk, opening it to the first page. The financial summary contrasting the initial purchase price with Prairie Point's acquisition cost. As I walked her through the evidence, pointing out the shell company, The inflated price, the trail of Wayne's deceptive absences, her expression shifted. Stunned silence first, then a slow, tightening fury that I recognized from years of watching her leadership. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the desk. She listened to Jed's recordings, her face hardening with each whispered word of offshore accounts. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the city. Eleanor leaned back, her eyes fixed on the dossier. "Wayne," she murmured, the name heavy with disgust. The nerve. She was appalled, but her pragmatism quickly took over. "No public scandals, Sarah. Not for Prairie Point Solutions. We'll handle this internally." The corporate machine, once set in motion, moved with ruthless efficiency. Wayne Jensen was quietly, swiftly, and irrevocably fired. There were no public statements, no dramatic walkouts. One day he was there, the next, his office was cleared, his name erased from the company directory. His career and reputation in corporate circles were utterly destroyed, word traveling through the discreet networks faster than any news report. The authorities, tipped off by Eleanor, began their quiet investigations into his secret room and offshore accounts, a legal reckoning that would unfold in the shadows. From a distance, Jed and I watched as Wayne's carefully constructed life unraveled. His lavish lakeside estate, once a symbol of his ill-gotten success, was quickly foreclosed upon, the manicured lawns becoming overgrown. There was a quiet satisfaction that settled over us, a cool, steady contentment. But it was also tempered by a sober understanding of the path we had walked, the cold calculations, the deliberate infiltration. This wasn't joyous revenge. It was justice earned, hard and often unpleasant. Back in our craftsman home, life returned to its steady rhythm. Jed continued his carpentry, the scent of wood shavings filling our workshop, creating beauty with his hands, honest and tangible. I found a new peace in my work at Prairie Point, a quiet confidence that came from knowing I had stood up for my husband, for our life, for what was right. One evening we sat at our oak kitchen island, the wood smooth and warm beneath our hands. The Midwestern sun, a familiar comfort, began its slow descent, casting long, peaceful shadows across the room. We simply held hands, no words needed. Some battles we understood leave scars etched deep in the memory, but some quiet victories, born of patience and a fierce, unwavering resolve, are undeniably worth the cost. It was a testament to hard work, to a quiet determination, and to a justice that, in the end, found its way home. The dust settled, as it always does. Wayne Jensen's downfall was swift and meticulously handled, leaving no public scars on Prairie Point Solutions, just a vacancy at the CFO position and a quiet inquiry into corporate malfeasance. His name, once synonymous with aggressive success, became a whisper of disgrace in the hushed corridors of finance, a cautionary tale told over expensive lunches about what happens when ambition overrides ethics. Jed and I never spoke of the details again. Not really. The satisfaction wasn't loud or triumphant. It was a deep, quiet thrum of something settled, a balance restored. Our craftsman home, solid and honest, continued to stand, a testament to true workmanship. The Midwestern sun, indifferent to human drama, rose and set, casting its long, familiar shadows. We learned that some battles are fought in silence, and the most profound victories are often the ones no one else ever sees.